Pakistan, which is India's foremost adversary, Pakistan has emerged as a key, I would say, mediator in that whole, I would say, West Asian crisis. Now, some people prefer to call Pakistan just a postman, in that West Asian landscape, and some people prefer to call it a mediator. Let's come to a middle ground. Maybe something more than a postman or less than a proper mediator. Okay. Now, even if that is the case, then also that basically enhances Pakistan's diplomatic clout and its position in the West Asian landscape. Pakistan's, I would say, growing strategic footprint in West Asia is not good for India. And then there is a religious affinity which we have to, I would say, factor in. Certainly, geopolitics is important, but then when you're dealing with the landscape, which is predominantly Islamic, Pakistan's commonality in religious terms gives it an edge over us. Okay? So, in case in the future, let's say if there is a war-like situation between India and Pakistan is a much better place because it has China on its side, it has Turkey on its side, it has Saudi on its side, and we will face challenges. We already seen Hamas members and Hamas commanders visiting Pakistan on several occasions, and they were invited to various public platforms. They visited press clubs and their court benches, high court and various other public platforms, Jamaat-e-Ulema-e-Islam, Jamaat-e-Islami meetings and all. And they also shared a dais with the Lashkar and Jaish commanders in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So certainly we can see that the ideological exchanges are taking place, and given the fact that these meetings are becoming much more frequent, I don't rule out the possibility of increasing, I would say, operational and tactical linkages. And Hamas has a much more, I would say, it's much more battle hardened. They have a much stronger experience in terms of running a propaganda war, information war, and they work with rockets. They work with much more complex weapon systems. They're almost at war throughout the year. At the same time, the Kashmir-centric terror groups, they're not fighting at the same intensity at which the West Asian groups, but given these exchanges, certainly they're going to learn a lot from them. And Hamas is facing a lot of crises in West Asia, so they're going to find safe havens in Pakistan, and they can render their services in training Kashmir-centric groups to orchestrate much more violence in Kashmir at a much more complex manner.
Are we witnessing the emergence of a completely new security landscape for India? One where geopolitics, ideology, terrorism, and information warfare are no longer separate challenges, but part of the same contest. That's what we are going to unpack today with Dr. Abhinav Pandya. He's a geopolitical analyst and a counter-terrorism expert. Thank you, Dr. Pandya, for joining us. From the current stalemate in West Asia viewers to Pakistan's evolving role, the future of terrorism in Kashmir, and the battle of narratives, radicalization, and ultimately what India's long-term civilizational response is going to look like. We're going to unpack all of that in the next 1 hour. Dr. Pandya, we are living through perhaps one of the most, crazy periods, crazy turbulent geopolitical periods of our times. There is wars, there's inequality, there's economic hardships, there's instability in West Asia, a rising China, persistent terrorism. When you look at the strategic landscape of the world today from India's lens, what worries you the most?
Thank you very much, Aditi. You have raised a very, very crucial and important topic, like India, how India locates itself in the emerging geopolitical landscape. Well, I do agree that we are going through a very critical, rather interesting and disturbing phase in the global geopolitics, and India is, I wouldn't say suddenly, but definitely India is faced with a very unique set of challenges. Previously, we just had two neighbors, turbulent neighbors and adversarial neighbors, China and Pakistan. We are mostly bothered about that, and I would say terrorism challenges in Jammu and Kashmir, and maybe emerging terrorism challenges in some other states. But then today On one hand, India wants to see itself as a major geopolitical actor and also wants to maintain its strategic autonomy amidst the increasingly getting stronger pressures from various global powers like Russia, US, and also a new emerging equation in geopolitics where you see a very new, different kind of, I would say, global array of countries raged against India, which includes, like, let's say, China, Pakistan, Turkey, and many new other actors, which will be in this equation, including Iran for that matter now. And then India again is looking for new friends now. So as of now, with Israel, we have a robust relationship, but then with the major powers, the things are not very clearly defined. With US, we cannot say that the relationship is rock solid. Certainly, it's going through a very strained phase. Again, with Russia, it's very conditional in many respects. Certainly, we have had a good history with Russia, and there is a strong, I would say, civilizational connect with Russia. But the problem is that in today's geopolitical kaleidoscope, Russia falls within the Chinese camp. And Chinese camp means China, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea. The situation is like that. I'm not saying that no, Russia is particularly responsible for that, but Russia's vision, particularly Mr. Putin's vision of a multipolar world order, that puts itself naturally in the camp which is totally opposed to the West. But for us, we are also trying to find a good, I would say, relationship space with the West. We have just signed an FTA agreement with the EU, and we are trying to at least salvage our relationship with the US. But this is happening at a cost. We are getting pressurized by various world powers. But you see today, Mr. Putin wants to sell us Su-57 to India, and then at the same time, Americans wants to sell F-35 to India. On that entire Ukraine issue, we face so much pressure from the West, and how to navigate these challenges, that is going to be a very difficult question. And with that, we have a very disturbing internal security situation, which will be a major challenge. That's why I always say that certainly, China is our territorial, I would say, challenge adversary. And Pakistan is more or less a manifestation of radical Islam, or I would say radicalization, terrorism challenges, which has now acquired a very serious and a threatening internal dimension. And
And now we can also add Bangladesh and Turkey as a mix.
yes. Yeah, so that's the camp which I just mentioned. Now when we talk about the other camp, so it's still in a very proto phase, but then you can you see various countries falling in that camp, which includes countries like Bangladesh, China, Turkey, Pakistan, maybe Qatar at some stage, Iran.
Security implications. Everybody is talking about oil and oil flows restrictions and Strait of Hormuz shut down, because of which oil flows are depleted. But there is also a security aspect linked to that. Talk to us about that.
Well, everyone talks about the oil exports impact on the economy, huge diaspora, which is workers, Indian workers, which are working in that region. That's certainly there, but then there's a very, I would say, intense and serious security dimension. Now here, the Pakistan, which is India's foremost adversary, Pakistan has emerged as a key, I would say, mediator in that whole, I would say, West Asian crisis. Now, some people prefer to call Pakistan just a postman, in that West Asian landscape, and some people prefer to call it a mediator. Let's come to a middle ground. Maybe something more than a postman or less than a proper mediator. Okay. Now, even if that is the case, then also that basically enhances Pakistan's diplomatic clout and its position in the West Asian landscape. And we saw that Pakistan has built a robust, I would say, relationship with Saudi Arabia. They signed this, mutual strategic defense agreement. With Turkey, they have excellent ties, but Turkey helped Pakistan during the Operation Sindoor. They even sent, their, I would say, military experts in POK, where reportedly they died. They are supporting Pakistan with drones, weapon systems, everything. Okay? Then Pakistan is also very close to Iran, by the way. And with our growing ties with Israel, our relationship with Iran is becoming much weaker. So certainly Pakistan's, I would say, growing strategic footprint in West Asia is not good for India. And then there's a religious affinity, which we have to, I would say, factor in. Certainly, geopolitics is important, but then, when you're dealing with a landscape, which is predominantly Islamic, Pakistan's commonality in religious terms gives it an edge over us. Okay, so in case in the future, let's say if there's a warlike situation between India and Pakistan, Pakistan is a much better place because it has China on its side, it has Turkey on its side, it has Saudi on its side, and we are no we will face challenges because like our former friends like Iran also, like now the relationship is not the same. I mean, we all agree, and even the world powers. US needs Pakistan more than India, in the West Asian
Because of the
situation.
geography.
Yes,
Literally.
geography, and you can see that America is in a much weaker position now. No, it's not like previous before the war when they would simply attack Iran just after a barrage of missiles are shot from Iran. Now Americans are trying to regain their space, or even they are facing an existential question about their bases in that region. So they need Pakistan to basically create a space for them, or the dependency or the vulnerabilities have increased. Even for that matter, China sees this, the American weakening as a new outlet for its expansion in that
Into
region.
West Asia.
Yes.
Correct.
So even if China wants to do that, it has to be, it has to go through Islamabad, because Pakistan is China's main proxy. Pakistan understands the region well. Pakistan has age-old, I would say, military diplomatic ties with the countries in the region. So, Pakistan is more important to both the powers, China, Russia. So certainly Pakistan has acquired, I would say, some kind of a very strong positioning in that West Asian landscape. So that makes situation difficult for us, particularly, if in the future, if there's a warlike situation between India and Pakistan, Pakistan is likely to get more support from the US and China. We already know how they helped Pakistan during Op Sindoor with the real-time intelligence. More recently, Americans have also told that in any future escalation between India and Pakistan, I think we won't be able to assist or help in the same manner with which we did it earlier. This was recent. They made a statement, and given the fact that our ties are really getting disturbing with the Americans, we can expect. And also, Trump's personal ties with Asim Munir, but the kind of benefits and favors which he has extended, be it crypto dealings or critical minerals. So I think that places Pakistan in a much more favorable spot vis-a-vis
For a
the global
country,
powers.
so as a country which is known historically for exporting terror, and not just talking about India. I'm talking about, let's say, Osama bin Laden being found kilometers, meters away from the Pakistani military headquarters, and suddenly, we all know that geopolitics is all transactional. So, in terms of the transactional value of Pakistan, has all of the rest of this been forgotten?
Geopolitics is a very ruthless game, it's purely transactional, and particularly, when you're dealing with powers like China, Russia, emotional things hardly matter. It's just about their national interest. Imagine Americans made someone like Ahmad al-Shara, a former terrorist, as the nation head in Syria. Okay, so I would say, the niceties and big moral pronouncements, do not really hold water when it comes to hardcore national interest. Now imagine Pakistan is the one, which really helped Iran get nuclear weapons.
Exactly.
And now Pakistan is, acting as a mediator in all those nuclear negotiations.
Don't you see more the kind of links that Trump and the Field Marshal share today? It's because of Pakistan being in that position where it has now become little like a vassal baby of the United States in terms of this entire mediation.
So here I would like to make a point that the way diplomacy is handled in Pakistan is entirely different from the way it's handled in India. In India, we have a civilian bureaucracy, which handles things in a very structured, I would say, procedure is more important and things are a bit laid back. But in Pakistan, it's the Pakistan army, and they have a very military, like I would say, fast track approach for handling diplomacy. So they try to take things in their own hands. Like, here Asim Munir is playing a very critical role. Like, is acting as a main front person, just to manage all these negotiations. He has appointed one of his very close relatives, Mohsin Naqvi, as a chief mediator. So in this case, I would say Certainly Pakistan is taking the advantage of the emerging strategic landscape in West Asia to embolden its position, and also to strengthen its position vis-a-vis India. But within that framework, Pakistan feels that its ties, the personal ties with Trump, can help it pursue this ambition in a much better manner. And Pakistani generals are known for that. They're known for amazing hospitality. They have fooled Americans in the past a million times at least. We know that, what they were doing during the global war on terror. They were funding Taliban. They were, and they were training Taliban, and they were sending American soldiers in body bags. At the same time, because of a very strong rapport between Musharraf and the American leadership, they were getting all kinds of military aid. So this, what's happening right now, it has a precedent, and I think that's how the Pakistani diplomatic machinery or the generals like to function. So they have created additional stakes for Donald Trump, to keep invested in Pakistan.
Do you think there's going to be a blowback for the Americans in this renewed engagement with Pakistan?
Well, the blowback was there in the past also, but Americans refused to learn. But in the present scenario, I see that American vulnerabilities are much stronger, because if in the West Asian scenario, if you see, all the Arab allies of the US, now they are in a very puzzled situation. I mean, they just have two options left. First of all, they are very threatened with the Iran, and the way Iran bombed their ports, military facilities, their economic facilities, or even their hotels. So they're really puzzled that we are perpetually vulnerable to Iran, and all their ambitions of economic growth and Mission 2030, they are simply failing now, and they see them like totally on the verge of devastation. So they have two options: either to strengthen your military ties with US, build your own indigenous military capacity, a first option. Now, in this case, if they want to do that, then certainly Americans will have to get much more involved in the region, and that will inevitably bring Pakistan in a much more active role, because Americans can supply technology, Americans can supply, I would say, they can sell weapons, but Pakistan has the ground forces, and they have the long experience of, I would say, sending its military forces to the region in the past. They've helped Jordan. Their forces were in Saudi. So Pakistan, definitely this, if this happens, then also US, Pakistan, jointly working on this project, that becomes much more likely. The second option is that the Arab states, they try to find some kind of a back channel with the Iranians, given the fact that Americans could not effectively protect them during this war. Now, if that is the option, then that also has to be done through China and Pakistan. So Pakistan will, in both the scenarios, Pakistan will get much more important. So right now, I think the question that whether this is going to blow back on Americans or not, is it's not that relevant, But what's more important is Americans trying to find their space, or regain their prestige and geopolitical space back in the West Asian region. And I think for that purpose, Pakistan continues to be important.
What is India's strategy to counter that? Because if what you're saying happens, and it seems to be happening, then that's not good as far as the Indian establishment is concerned.
I think India's strategy in this emerging scenario should be very, I would say, much more focused on the military and the defense part, because Pakistan's getting stronger is directly going to, impact its force posture in South Asian region, because Pakistan may be pursuing various, I would say, strategic ambitions in West Asia, but its primary focus is India, and it nurtures some kind of a pathological hatred or obsession for India. No, so if Pakistan gets stronger, and the global powers become much more dependent on Pakistan, Pakistan is likely to take leverage and likely to use that space, to orchestrate a large scale terror attack in India, or maybe, let's say, even if there's a warlike situation, then to, I would say, damage India's, national security interest. So I think India should primarily focus, on the military part much more, because we have to see, on the Western front, Pakistan is definitely there. On the Eastern front, they have strengthened and really made their penetration in Bangladesh very strong. Now they have a new Dhaka cell. ISI has a completely new Dhaka cell in that region. China would certainly want to keep India completely squeezed between these two fronts and totally embroiled in these internal struggles. And then there is a third front, Pakistan. Given the fact that we have a very polarized domestic scenario in India right now in terms of particularly communal relations, there is a very huge surge in radicalization. I'm not saying among the, I would say, at a very large scale, but still, covert sleeper cells are emerging in various parts of the country. They have linkages with Pakistan, and groups like ISKP or Al Qaeda in Indian subcontinent. They are using, this particular sentiment to expand their bases.
The defense partnership that we've now signed with the UAE, for instance, or the fact that the Israel UAE India axis.
Yes.
How much of a counterweight is it going to be to Pakistan's overtures in the region?
Well, it can be a good counterweight depending on India's efforts. I think India needs to make its, I would say, presence and its diplomatic footprint in a very clear and in a very assertive manner now. So India, UAE, Israel, Greece, Armenia.
Armenia.
Yeah, Cyprus. So this is a new axis, which can be very effective in combating, countering, and containing India's adversaries in that region. We are selling weapons to Armenia that has already rattled the security establishment in Turkey.
Yeah.
So I
Also
think,
Cyprus?
yes, definitely. So that is, so I think that's one area where India really needs to work, and we have to come out of our complacency. Actually, our approach is generally, just keeping all the people happy.
But I don't think the complacency is the issue right now. What I see, given the fact that this other axis that you're talking about right now, which is the UAE, Israel, Cyprus, Armenia, Greece, weapons to Greece. All of this is also happening simultaneously.
Yes, definitely there has been some change, but there's not some change, but a major change, from what it used to be earlier. Given the fact that situation is becoming really critical.
Really volatile.
Yes, but still we need more West Asia experts. We need, I would say, more closer level engagements, strategic engagements, economic engagements, and more involvement in that region. Say. And that also, I mean, calls upon making, I would say, major changes in our diplomatic, approach and how we handle things there. Because at some stage, see, we have to realize that we cannot be, pedaling in two boats at all the time. Because or if on one hand you are strengthening your ties with Israel, certainly that is going to reverberate in the Arab capitals or even in Tehran. Okay, but realism or like transactional diplomacy always have its space. So we have to keep that in mind. Emotions and, I would say, idealism aside, and keeping our priorities clear, knowing our friends clearly, identifying our friends in a very clear manner, and standing with them in a very decisive and a clear manner. And then, if that disturbs our ties with, some of our former friends, or like, former, if not allies, but at least, former friends, then we have to manage them in a very, I would say, calibrated manner. Okay. And we have to convey it specifically that, okay, fine, if there is no love lost on emotional grounds, at least, transactional diplomacy can be very effective. And fine, if Iran is not happy with India being getting close to Israel, in that case, certainly, we have this comfort level. We have had ties with you in the past. We can be a channel of communication, or we can make things easier for you. But then, having said that, we have to realize that our long-term strategic interest in the emerging geopolitical landscape are going to be with the Israel.
And also because what choice does India have?
Yeah.
If not that.
Yes.
Is there a possibility or a risk of, because if this West Asia crisis continues beyond a point, and even if it ends, is there a risk of battle-hardened fighters, networks, or ideologies finding their way into South Asia?
I mean, that's you raised a very interesting point, and I wouldn't deny that, I wouldn't rule out the possibility of that. If you look at last year, we already seen Hamas members and Hamas commanders visiting Pakistan on several occasions, and they were invited to various public platforms. They visited press clubs and their court benches, high court, and various other various public platforms, Jamiat Ulema Islam, Jamaat Islami meetings and all. And they also shared a dais with the Lashkar and Jaish commanders in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So certainly we can see that the ideological exchanges are taking place, and given the fact that these meetings are becoming much more frequent, I don't rule out the possibility of increasing, I would say, operational and tactical linkages. And Hamas has a much more, I would say, about it's much more battle hardened. They have a much stronger experience in terms of running a propaganda war, information war, and they work with rockets. They work with much more complex weapon systems. They almost are at war throughout the year. At the same time, the Kashmir-centric terror groups, they're not fighting at the same intensity at which the West Asian groups. But given these exchanges, certainly they're going to learn a lot from them. And Hamas is facing a lot of crisis in West Asia, so they're going to find safe havens in Pakistan, and they can render their services in training Kashmir-centric groups to orchestrate much more violence in Kashmir at a much more in a much more complex manner, using maybe chemical weapons or gliders, or I would say drones, and all kinds of new weaponry. Likewise, Turkey's Sadat fighters, so Sadat is a paramilitary kind of a private army that Turkey has, and they've been deployed in the past in various conflict theaters in Libya and Africa, many other places. They are also very trained, but jihadist fighters. They're trained in various aspects of an asymmetric war, operations, jungle operations, urban warfare, propaganda war. And reportedly, after 370, I guess one of our former external intelligence chiefs also said that Sadat fighters were active in Jammu and Kashmir. And given the fact that Turkey is, with the way Turkey is, coming close to Pakistan and getting very intensely involved in South Asian affairs, I see a very strong possibility of even Sadat fighters getting much more active, not just in Kashmir, but even in the other parts of the country. And then we have to keep in mind that Turkey has a different interest here. It's not just the idea of supporting Pakistan, but Turkey's I would say overarching ambition is to revive that proto-Ottoman caliphate, some sort of a neo-Ottoman caliphate. And Turkey knows that in the Arab world, Turkey will be contested because the control of the Muslim religious places, it's with the Arabs. So here Turkey has a history. The various rulers in the past in South Asia, Mughal rulers, they had Turkish connections. So Turkey feels that the huge population of Muslims in South Asia, maybe 200 million or whatever, that they can, they're very likely to, accept Turkey's leadership of the global Islamic community, and that's why they are reaching out to Muslims in South Asia in various manners, through soft power, through various serials like Ertugrul Ghazi, etc. They're reaching out to community leaders, business leaders, and then most importantly, by reaching out to the terror organizations. And I've come, during my more recent visits to Kashmir, I've come across various people who talk about Turkey's increasingly getting much more active in Kashmir. You have a huge number of, I would say, Kashmiri young writers and youngsters working in the TRT world in Turkey. A lot of journalists from Jammu and Kashmir, they frequently visit Turkey. Some of them are settled there.
So the revocation of Article 370 and after that, the supposed downturn in terrorism in the valley, and after Pahalgam, of course. Are you seeing it come unstuck, or are you seeing the intelligence playing a larger role in Jammu and Kashmir now?
So I think that the dynamics have changed now. And definitely, Article 370 dealt a major blow to the ecosystem of terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, which was working in a very blatant and I would say open manner. Now things have changed in terms of modus operandi, style, nature. But then I wouldn't say that things have become really peaceful and quiet. Stone pelting has gone down, but when it comes to militancy, Pakistan's approach is quite different now. First of all, because over the last 7-8 years, particularly after 2016, terrorist attacks have led to major military escalations between India and Pakistan. So Pakistan would not want to orchestrate a terror attack in such a manner that its name or its footprint directly comes out. Okay, because it has in the past also, it was almost on the verge of getting blacklisted by FATF. Then it managed to get out from the grey list and all. So Pakistan has created terror groups with the local names, which have secular sounding names like
Yeah.
Resistance Group, People's Anti-Fascist Force, and various other Kashmir Tigers and all those groups. And just to show that, that these groups are indigenous and they're fighting against some kind of Hindu nationalism or dominance, because these names are someone who is well versed in propaganda warfare, and someone who knows what trends on Twitter and social media, they might have come up with these names, and they're very high on propaganda and narrative front. Secondly, they're sending some very hardcore and highly trained, terrorist commanders to Kashmir now. Some of them have, received like training from the special service groups in Pakistan, SSB, this elite forces in Pakistan. They have much better weapons, which were left by the Americans in Afghanistan, including very complex night vision devices, and they have much better communication gadgets. They were using ultra sets, now they're using supposedly even more complex ones. So we don't have a good human strike now. Yeah. And partly the reason is that, Pakistan, it's not just that, I mean, it's something totally about our failure, but it's also because Pakistan changed its strategy. They abandoned their old, like overground workers who are very commonly identified. So whenever terror attack would happen, normally police would, round up the old OGWs and start interrogating them. Now the model is very different. Older ones have been abandoned. Younger ones include 13, 14, 15-year-old young, girls and boys, who know nothing about what's happening, and they're shared information purely on a need to know basis, that you have to deliver this so and so small packet, or parcel to some particular stop. So it's like a point to point courier system which they've employed. Besides, you have a main handler sitting in Pakistan who is in touch with 100 different people in Jammu and Kashmir, who are simply, normal, ordinary people like us. Someone is working at coaching center, someone is working in the government department. They are given specific tasks to execute. They're given a weapon, and then the instruction to execute a particular task, and then they are asked to drop a weapon. Then they come back to the normal life. So this is a new variety of militant that we see in Kashmir. And they're not openly joining terrorist organizations. That's why we say that, local recruitment is not taking place. But then internal linkages are getting stronger, and the huge contingent of foreign terrorists which are coming from Pakistan, they are making occasional contacts with the security forces in terms of encounters and all. But then they're also consolidating their space and their presence at the grassroots, and they're going radio silent. Recently, in my most recent visit to Kashmir, I got a chance to hear the conversation of a prominent terrorist commander, Saifullah, who was talking to two of his colleagues. And he says that, we are laying such a strong groundwork in Jammu and Kashmir that very soon you'll see hundreds of people coming out with weapons on the street. So that means definitely there is something up their sleeves. But at the same time, you see a new, I would say, optimism among the youth, particularly the educated youth who wants to integrate with India, who appreciates what government is doing, and who wants a much better life in terms of employment.
The new youth who wants to engage with India versus this group of people that are getting radicalized or being radicalized by the Pakistani handlers little by little, that they are now planning something huge. Because you said such a big thing and then you moved on. So I'll just stopping you there for a moment. Which of it is more, if you were to put percentages to it, given your understanding of the Kashmiri landscape right now, which of it is more active?
But Kashmir is a very layered society, but still, I would say the former group, the radicalized group, is much more, I would say, stronger in terms of its presence. And here, I think I should also mention that, they are seeing Kashmir as a very international issue, equating with Gaza, Palestine, and due to social media, they have this very strong exposure to what's happening in West Asia. So all these things, they form a very critical component of, of their strategic thinking now, particularly among the youngsters. Some of them, well, some of them do talk nice things about, India, just because, to avoid the crackdown from the security forces and all. But then the networks internally, they're very, getting serious. And we came across this, a new group of, radicalized doctors. So this radicalization is spreading among the educated youngsters also. So that's also something that we have to keep in mind. Besides that, organizations like Jamaat-e-Islami, which were and which continue to be the, I would say, the mainstream, or the hub of terrorist ecosystem in Jammu and Kashmir, they are once again consolidating at the grassroots. The government of India banned Jamaat-e-Islami in 2019, but then they have also changed their strategy and tactics. They're not displaying, I would say, religious gears and religious dressing. They dress up like normal people in suits, pants, and ties, and they're spreading and consolidating in a very organic manner at the grassroots level. Okay, and I guess at some stage even our agencies are failing in understanding this new phenomenon. They're even trying to revive Jamaats. Many former Jamaat leaders, they stood in elections recently. So now Pakistan has given a new instruction to the formers, to the separatists and the OGWs, that please start joining the mainstream political parties, be it BJP, National Conference, PDP, or even the proxy organizations floated by India's right-wing cultural and nationalist groups. There are many coming up in Kashmir. So that it's a specific instruction from the ISI masterminds to join these organizations, use these organizations as a cover to survive, float, I would say, misinformation, penetrate into the other parts of India, create sleeper cells, networks, and damage the country and the systems from within.
How difficult is it for the Indian intelligence to figure out all this is happening in Kashmir?
Now it's much more difficult because previously, we had structured terrorist organizations, like let's say Hizbul Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed. There was the three main groups. When people started joining terrorist organization, a person would start his journey as a stone pelter. Then the person would become more radicalized and become an OGW. At some stage, the person would become a terrorist, a proper terrorist. Okay. And they also announced it on social media, and the local police had a very robust human network, because JKP was very active, and JKP has strong local roots. So it was easy to find out people, who was getting in touch with which organization, and also the keep a track on the local OGW networks and all. And we were using the technical intelligence in a very efficient manner. But now it's very challenging because they have completely abandoned their ways and means. Our tech and capabilities are not able to completely bust and completely I would say decipher what Pakistan is using. They're using new gadgets, more complex gadgets, and then their methods have changed. They're even refraining from using modern technological gadgets for communication at a much wider scale. Encrypted communications, gaming applications, and dating applications, they're being used for, I would say, communication. And besides that, the new trend of hybrid militants, which I just mentioned. So you don't know, I mean, who is who, like right now, where, because they don't make announcements on social media before joining a terrorist organization.
How's Pakistan reaching out to all this? Because if radicalization is happening in a much layered manner in Kashmir right now, what are the modus operandi that Pakistan is deploying to reach out to us?
As I just mentioned, that the structure, command and control structure, has gone a significant change. Let me discuss about like how it has gone a change on the militancy side first, and then the R security side. So on the militancy side, the old OGWs are gone, and there are clear instructions that no need to make announcements and big announcements on social media and all. So you have handlers sitting in Pakistan, random handlers, and they talk to at least a few hundred people in Jammu and Kashmir, and information is entirely shared on a need-to-know basis. And after that, for some specific short-scale, low-level tasks, they ask people to do something, and then come back, drop your weapon. But for large scale attacks, then definitely you have like proper terror groups, foreign terrorists which have infiltrated into Jammu and Kashmir from Pakistan. And unfortunately, we don't even have the exact number of how many terrorists have come, because like as I said, that human part is missing. Previously, they used to make announcements. Now, they're using multiple infiltration routes. They're coming from Punjab. They're coming from Jammu, Punjab belt. Also from the northern reaches. But on the other side, previously JKP was very, like JKP was very effective. But after the abrogation of Article 370, the whole policing structure has changed. Mostly we have young police officers, IPS officers, let's say from 2016, 2017, 18, 19 batches, and they're coming from other states of India.
And so they don't have that
Yes, they don't have that connect, first of all. And secondly, Kashmir is a very complex conflict theater. It's not like the typical law and order situation, So there you can't just, go and like in a day or two, you can understand the situation. You have to get down to the grassroots. You don't act, you cannot, manage things in a typical Sahab-like manner. You have to cultivate sources. You have to understand their minds. So that requires a lot of hard work. So now, I mean, mostly these youngsters are handling districts, and even the leadership in the police is also mostly from the outside, So they don't have that understanding, and that's actually damaging a lot. Besides that, there are a lot of, I would say, internal organizational issues between the JKP and IPS officers and the officers coming from outside, and JKP officers, getting sidelined to other positions. So that's damaging. But Pakistan definitely has made massive changes in terms of
so there's a
reaching out to
change
people. Yes,
in Pakistan's strategy to infiltrate Kashmir
yes,
and radicalization in Kashmir. At the same time, after the revocation of Article 370, JKP, which used to be contribute to the major human factor, that is completely,
yes,
on the decline.
yes,
The new officers in place are not able to gather information
yes,
or intel in the same manner and are perhaps inexperienced
yes,
in how to deal with Kashmir. That's why that's a very dire picture you're painting. And in this situation, there are also Turkish influence which is
yes.
coming in.
Now,
Talk
I
to
mean,
us about that.
now things are much more subtle and much more silent, because like over the last 3-4 years, I visited Kashmir several times, and whenever I go there, people say that, sir, there's no human, it's completely black. We don't know what's the sentiment on the ground. Like suddenly thousands of people coming, on the streets and participating in Tiranga rallies or saying Bharat Mata ki jai, Bharat Mata ki jai. Now that sounds a little difficult to explain, because Kashmir has a history of conflict for several, I would say, decades. And then there's a very intense radicalization. Lately, even organizations and outfits like Muslim Brotherhood, started penetrating Kashmir. Kashmir, and particularly after the Arab Spring, Kashmiri youngsters got a strong exposure to West Asian global jihadist trends. Now, with all this in the background, I mean, it's totally, I would say, you're completely shocked. You find it difficult to digest that, suddenly why there is this huge silence, or there is something seriously, simmering at the grassroots.
Is there an understanding that this is there? Because if when you go to Kashmir and people tell you there is no human, or this is, we feel something is in the air, but we can't put a finger on it. Uh, I'm sure the security establishment is aware of it simultaneously. Do you see any actions on the ground? Do you see any movement in any direction to counter Pakistan's new strategy?
So I feel that, well, abrogation of Article 370 was a great step, which was, I mean, done at the right time, because if they'd not done it, then, it would have been extremely difficult to do it now with the way Pakistan's, global clout is increasing, and things are changing. So it was a very effective decision. But then I think, a lot should have been done after that. India needed, that was a beginning basically, and after that we needed a strategic roadmap for Kashmir for at least next 20-25 years, because you have a big generation, a huge massive generation raised on conflict, and to change their mindset, to change the narrative discourse, you needed a multi-pronged strategy and humongous efforts at the societal level, governance level. Oh, that's not happening in Kashmir. It's not just about the intelligence or the kinetic measures. I guess you need to reach out to the people. The main problem right now in Kashmir is again the governance, extreme, I would say, corruption in the bureaucracy, and the outreach. Particularly the people feel that it's a time to go for a better outreach. With the people who are slightly nationalist minded, or who want to, like, come to this side at least, and find much better, I would say, a positive future for them. So that sentiment needs to be tapped in. It needs to be capitalized. I know it's a difficult task. It's a challenging task, but then, we have to start making efforts. On the intelligence side also, I don't see much, I would say, serious any effort, basically to counter Pakistan's new strategy. No, but yes, definitely army and, they're trying multiple things to, again, revive the human network. IB is again trying to get active, but then they continue with their old methods, and now things are much more diffused, much more, I would say, widespread in the society, that, it's very difficult to identify people. And I think, now the things in Kashmir have entered into a new phase. Previously, it was just a proxy war, but now we are seeing a phase in which, things are moving into a proper real war between two state actors, not just the non-state actors. I'm not saying that non-state actors have become dysfunctional or they have become irrelevant. They are still relevant, not just in South Asia but across the world. Entire Pahalgam attack was done by a terrorist organization, which led to Op Sindhu. Hamas attack led to this war in West Asia right now. Likewise, in South Asia also, non-state actors will continue to play a critical role. They will be the major cause of a future war between India and Pakistan. But then, having said that, they are slightly on the margins, and the main, now the rivalry is properly between, India and Pakistan, and we can see that over the last 10 years, all the major terror attacks have led to increased escalations between India and Pakistan, and the threshold, the intensity is
increasing every time.
Yes. So this time it was just like a mini war. Next time, if there's any, I would say, proper terror attack, it's the scale is going to be much higher, and because of that, now ISI has a much stronger grip on terrorism and this proxy war in Kashmir.
Okay, if you were advising India's leadership today, what would be the single most important long-term response to the challenges that you see Kashmir facing?
First of all, I would advise them to, have a much more intelligence footprint, and I would say that requires many organizational changes from within the system. You have to find experts, you have to find people, who have worked on the ground, and to employ there, put them there on a very long-term basis, and then have your clear priorities. Secondly, a youth outreach with the people, who wants to have a better life. That's much more important. Crack down on corruption and the improvement in governance part. That's more important. And then, yes, certainly we have to be prepared for a final, I would say, showdown with Pakistan, because Pakistan has, made a massive deployment of, its troops and the jihadis on the other side, because recently we got a chance to meet a guide, who supposedly brings the, groups of terrorists from the other side, and he said that जनाब टोपी वाले और पगड़ी वाले दोनों उस तरफ बैठे हैं. Topi wala means the soldiers proper, and pagdi wala means the mujahideen. So Pakistan has created, first, second, third, and the fourth line of defense, which includes proper army and mujahideens, the retired, the soldiers, veterans who have been made to settle in that region. So these are things, yes,
Religion just
is PPOJK, that's in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. On our side, yes, I mean, we need to focus on the intelligence part.
more than intelligence also, perhaps if this is the kind of topi wale or pagdi wale theater on that side, then perhaps maybe also get ready for
Yes, that's a foreign domain. I mean,
confrontation.
yes.
You mentioned the conversation that you overheard between
His name was Saifullah. So yeah, so he was a part of this group, which was, I mean, locally it was known as Israel group. There were 7 terrorists who came from Pakistan, and I think 3 or 4 got neutralized last year, and the 3 people got neutralized this year. The latest one, the commander Saifullah, was neutralized in the Chatru forest in Operation Trashi, maybe 2-3 months back.
So that conversation that you overheard, I'm assuming it was with one of the people in the security forces who made you listen to that conversation. That and what you said with me, that he talked about something bigger unfolding. What do you see? I mean, I'm sure you were the security people that you were with when watching that tape would have spoken about what he meant.
Well, he said many other things also. So he was trying to boost the morale of the foreign terrorists who were coming to Kashmir. No, And then he said that, and he also warned them against, I would say, getting straight, because he said that the Kashmiri society that way, in many respects, it's very easier to, to find girlfriends in Jammu and Kashmir. So please, don't fall for those traps. You'll get many opportunities, but if you fall for those traps, you will be dead. And if you stick to your religious, devotion and ideals, you will succeed. And no. And then he said many things about the Indian army also. Certainly, many of those things were exaggeration and glorifying their activities, and and trying to put armed forces in a bad light. But then that was also to boost their morale. And it seemed that when he was saying all these things, it was in a very, I would say, cold-blooded manner. It didn't seem as if he was speaking out of anger or like any emotional sentiment or rage. So, but there is something which is cooking up, at the grassroots, and there's a much bigger plan, which is difficult to measure at this stage. But there can be certain possibilities. Let's say if there's a future escalation between India and Pakistan, then these foreign terrorists, are
They
settled
can ferment
yes, they can local
tensions,
unrest,
local, right.
unrest, mobilizing people there. They can act as a catalyst, and you can have hundreds of thousands of youngsters, coming on the streets, either in stone pelting or with the weapons, the obstructing the movement of the security forces. And this cannot happen just in Jammu and Kashmir. It can happen in other parts of the country also, like Punjab also. Over the last year, I guess. There were more than 350 recoveries of weapons and ammunition, and that included AK-47, which has happened after a very long time. AK-47 is a proper assault rifle which is used by terrorists. Likewise, in Bangladesh and Northeast. They are also the hotbeds. Yes.
Okay, that's we saw how the white collar terrorists was flourishing right here under our very noses in the national capital region in Faridabad at a educational institution. But having said that, how confident are you that, or not confident that India can overcome this threat?
Uh, well, it's a very difficult question that you asked me, because now I see this challenge of radicalization, extremism, terrorism, not just as a Kashmir phenomenon. Now it's a pan-India phenomenon. And previously, we had like structured terrorist organizations with transnational linkages, and proper funding mechanisms and all. Now it's very diffused. Just look at the case of these radicalized doctors. Who would imagine, highly educated young doctors having networks in Faridabad, Lucknow, and young women just living a normal, natural life, active on social media, highly encrypted applications, and using locally available materials like ammonium nitrate. In the future, they may come up with a chemical weapon which is made out of locally available materials. There were recent cases in Hyderabad where they were trying to this ricin poisoning. ISKP cells, Islamic State cells, have been busted in various parts of the country, and they're not the boys who have gone to Pakistan to receive training. They are absolutely local people. Even from the city where I come from, Udaipur, there was this famous killing of Kanhaiya Lal, which was done in a proper ISIS style manner. He was beheaded just the way ISIS beheads its hostages. And the boys who did that, they were not Pakistani trained, I would say, militants. The local people with local roots. So now it's in a very diffuse situation, and now we have a scenario, a situation in India where there is a perception, particularly a larger narrative among the Muslim community, that their rights are being, trampled upon, and they are being cornered. Whether it's a reality or it's a perception, that's a different debate.
Or propaganda,
Yeah.
which is
Yes.
trying to
Yes. Yeah. And
make them think that
radical organizations are using it as a propaganda. Terrorist organizations, radical organizations, they are giving it a religious color. And groups like Jamaat-e-Islami, PFI, they're using some of these scattered, isolated incidents, as a propaganda to radicalize, indoctrinate them. Now, let's say if you are bulldozing an illegal structure or illegally constructed mosque, now it's being interpreted in a very different manner in the ISKP documentation. In ISKP magazines, they would project it as a complete, I would say, suppression of Muslims, destruction of their religious sites and all, and that's impacting the mind of a common man. So get to see a lot of videos in the recent past, where young boys, there was one video in which there were two young little boys who were saying that the Iran, Khamenei, our rebel was killed. That's why, we are totally against that. And he said that India's prime minister should die. India's prime minister should not live. We hate him. And no, if we have to, if we are given a chance to fight, we'll go to Israel and we'll kill the Israelis, even if that leads to a 20 years of prison for us. Now that's something which a child of 8-10 years is saying. Now that speaks volumes about the mindset, and I mean, this is a particular, like a very fertile ground where Pakistan sponsored terrorist proxies can create networks, cells, and this can happen in each and every small city of India. So this is the big challenge for India. India will have to, India needs to focus majorly on India's internal security, because let me put it once again that our biggest security challenges are not external. China, for that matter, is busy fighting with various external powers. For China, India is just a subsidiary issue that has to be kept busy and occupied with internal issues. India is not the main adversary. China is busy with multipolar world, with US, with Americans, with West Asia. Pakistan is just an extension of that. But the biggest challenge that we face now comes from the internal security domain, and how India tackles it, that requires a humongous, a massive effort. Again, a roadmap, a proper strategy for the next 20 years, which has to have multiple, I would say, arms, which it will have to include covert measures. It will have to include, I would say, neutralization, elimination of terrorist masterminds, how to deal with the Islamist organizations like PFI and Jamaat-e-Islami. Organizations like PFI, they have a presence in colleges, universities, and they operate in plain sight, like, they operate like legal entities. How to deal with them, how to deal with the charities, who are supporting and funding such entities, and then how to deal with the youngsters. So that requires a very strong, I would say, strategy, which has to have a continuation, and which needs to get out of the normal bureaucratic, I would say, style of thinking.
Yeah.
Even the intelligence needs more experts, out of the box thinking, and I would say it has to come out of its, I would say, typical, Babu style functioning to deal with these challenges.
Right. Our Intel boss in India, uh, he's credited with Chanakya braids. So let's hope he's already doing something on those regards. But that's quite a scary yet a very fascinating conversation, and very insightful. And hope it's lent some insight to you viewers. And thank you for watching us. Stay safe. And let's hope that Ajit Zawal is able to already is on top of these problems. Right, sir?
Thank you very much.